Good afternoon, scholars. Happy Wednesday. I'm going to start today's video going over yesterday's exit ticket. Um, and then we're going to take a look at what's coming up for us today. All right. So the past couple days, we've been gathering background knowledge on the gold rush in Alaska at the end of the 1890s, early 1900s. You had a video and this reading, okay? What I've done is created an exemplar exit ticket where I talk about all the different possible answers you could have given. And I'm going to share this same document with you. The point of the exemplar is so that you have something to compare your work with the exemplar. It's a good way to give yourself feedback so that you can learn by comparing from your answer to the exemplar answer. How similar were they? What was different about them, so that you know kind of what's being expected, not only in terms of how accurate was your answer, but also the way that you explained yourself with, complete sentences and the formatting. All right. So a lot of times if I give if a point is worth, if a question is worth less points, that's because it's a simpler question. It's a comprehension question. So number one, ask for two different reasons why people traveled to Alaska during the Klondike Gold Rush. There were at least five that you could have given. So take a look at the options. If you named two of those and you did some complete sentences, you would have got a 2 out of 2. If you were, maybe you named two, but with incomplete sentences, that might have given you a 1 out of 2, or perhaps you only named one. But there's different ways that you could be scored there. All right. Number two, this might have been tricky, the wording. Let me space it down so we can see all the options together. It asks what made Alaskan towns so dangerous. I was specific about the towns themselves. A lot of people described the Alaskan wilderness as part of Alaska, which I understand why you would do that, but I was really specifically thinking about the towns that it named. And so there's three different options you could have given for why the towns were dangerous. They were small towns before this with no need for police, and then all of a sudden thousands of people show up, and there was no existing police force, and so a lot of these towns had no cops. There was stealing going on. People were really suspicious of each other because of all the supplies they needed. There are also a lot of shady businesses around, which attracts shady people. So kind of a rough place to be. But those are the different options you could have given. You could have given any one of these options, and you would have gotten 2 out of 2 as long as you really explained it. One scholar just said there was no police. Give a little bit more, like I did. There was no police. I did that extra sentence of why, because it was a tiny town, so they didn't have police, right? Very rarely will one sentence do the trick. So make sure you just give a little bit extra to really show your thinking. Number three, what were 3 challenges posed? Make sure you named 3 different challenges. I found 5 that I could find from the reading in the movie about the wilderness, the cold, the fast-moving rivers, the mountains themselves, long distances between towns, and then also mud, which we know lots of horses got stuck in whenever things did start to warm up. All right, number 4, this was a tricky one. So I have kind of written out my exemplar answer of what it would look like to fully answer this question with facts from the reading or the video and just my thinking behind it, connecting it to Buck. Okay. So describe a dog versus nature and a dog versus man challenge that Buck is likely to face in the Call of the Wild. Support your predictions with facts from the Klondike Gold Rush text and or video. So the first one I addressed, because I was told to do 2 different things, I split them into 2 different paragraphs. Okay. So the first, the kind of obvious challenge is dog versus nature, because the Alaskan wilderness is extremely dangerous. Temperatures are below freezing for much of the year. The whole region is covered in steep mountains. Between the steep mountains are rivers that rage. As the mountain snow melts, surviving this environment is going to be extremely challenging for Buck. So right there, I made sure to connect it back to the character of Buck. Second one is dog versus man. There was a couple different angles you could have taken with this. I said one dog versus man challenge Buck is likely to face is having a cruel and greedy owner. The Klondike Gold Rush text and PBS video describe the deaths of countless horses. Their owners literally worked them to death as the horses carried their supplies through the mountain passes. Some would get stuck in the mud and left to die, while others would die slipping and falling down steep mountain passes. These deaths were so widespread, quote, the smell of dead carcasses became overpowering. Here's my analysis. I'm going to connect it back to Buck to show why I'm explaining these, why I'm giving these facts. While Buck may not be a horse, he's still likely to encounter an owner who is willing to sacrifice his well-being to strike it rich. Buck is going to need help if he's going to survive in the Alaskan wild. And several of these accounts show that animal welfare was not a priority for those seeking gold. Another option, an alternative claim. What if you said, challenge if it would be incompetent owners? So I argued he might have a greedy owner who, it's cruel and greedy because he's so obsessed. He wants to get that gold so bad he doesn't care what happens to Buck. An alternative claim you could have said was Buck might have an owner who does not know what he's doing, which is just as dangerous because you can die that way too. All right. I hope these exemplars help. I will provide these as part of today's materials so that you can compare them to what you wrote on yesterday's exit ticket. Today's assignment, this is the exit ticket because we're getting into the book today. Okay, so if you have the physical copy, we're going from both, whether you have the digital copy, which I'll run through again in a second, or if you have the physical copy, these are both on pages 3 through 5. They just stop at a different part on page 5. So I'll go ahead and read the first paragraph. Actually, let's go to the digital copy so you have it in front of you too, just in case you don't have the book, and there's a reminder of how to get there. So I went to openlibrary.com. If you check this out already, guys, it should be in My Loans. And if you don't know how to sign up, go back to the resource video that I shared of how to sign up for an account. All right. A lot of times when I give you these comprehension questions, they're going to be in order. And it's a lot of times my questions are going to be just comprehension. Do you understand what's going on? And I'll hit you with the more complex question, usually the last one where you have to kind of argue something or really explain something in depth that's not quite so obvious. So the first question is, what is the author foreshadowing in page 3 in the first paragraph, the one that starts with Buck did not read? The book starts off with a poem that we're not going to dive into right now. Old longings nomadic leap, chafing at custom's chain. Again from his brumal sleep wakens the Farron strain. Now we'll get into the story. That's just kind of a poem that's hinting at nature and your instincts being deep down and wanting to come alive. And but we'll get into that later. Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing, not alone for himself, but for every Tidewater dog, strong of muscle and with warm, long hair, from the Puget Sound to San Diego. The Puget Sound's in Seattle, so this is like basically all the way down the West Coast. Because men groping in the Arctic darkness, had found a yellow metal. And because steamship and transportation companies were booming the find, thousands of men were rushing into the Northland. These men wanted dogs, and the dogs they wanted were heavy dogs with strong muscles by which to toil in furry coats to protect them from the frost. So your first question, what is he foreshadowing at on page 3 with Buck? What's coming that Buck doesn't know? All right, I will leave you there. Again, these are going to be, I'll add, my bad, I'm going to add the point totals for these. The first 3 are just 2-point questions. Like, clearly explain, answer these questions. You don't need to give evidence, though. Just make sure it's in complete sentences. 4 is where you're going to have to have an ASAC response. So you have to argue, is Buck humble? Agree or disagree? Make sure you really answer that question with context, with evidence, with analysis to prove why you said, how does your evidence that you give show that he is or is not humble? All right. Enjoy the first couple pages of Call of the Wild, and I will check back in tomorrow.